You deploy Copilot and wait for the productivity wave to hit, but instead of a breakthrough, you see a 300% spike in data loss prevention events. The assumption was that the AI would find our brilliance, but in reality, it is mostly finding our permission debt. The Everyone group in your SharePoint environment is currently the largest security hole in your organization, and it acts like an open door that nobody bothered to close because the data was buried in the basement. Now, that data is conversational. Your current sensitivity labeling strategy is not a shield. It is a data graveyard that hides information from the people who actually need it, while doing nothing to stop the AI from surfacing the wrong things to the wrong people. This is the collaborative AI silo crisis. Today we are moving from containment to context, and we are going to save your AI investment by fixing the structural lie at the heart of your data governance model, the inheritance paradox. The fundamental flaw in most AI rollouts is a misunderstanding of how the machine thinks, and while you might assume that Copilot makes decisions about who sees what, it actually does not. Copilot is a mirror that inherits your existing organizational entropy, so it does not create new access. It simply operationalizes the access you already gave away years ago. Think of it as the spotlight effect. Before AI, oversharing was latent, like a messy filing cabinet in a basement nobody visited, but AI makes that latent oversharing visible at machine speed. If a junior analyst asks for a summary of recent strategy shifts and your M&A folder is set to internal, the AI will summarize the merger you have not announced yet. This is not a breach, it is a feature of your own architecture. The reality is that manual labeling coverage rarely exceeds 10% in the average enterprise because we have spent a decade telling users to tag their files and they simply have not done it. We relied on a set it and forget it mentality for sensitivity tags and assumed that once a file was marked public, it stayed that way forever. But data is fluid, which means a document that was public yesterday might contain a sensitive prompt response today. When we rely on static labels, we create invisible barriers to cross-departmental intelligence, and a highly confidential label on a project plan might stop the marketing team from seeing a launch date they actually need to do their jobs. It creates a silo, and these silos are the reason your AI feels less like an assistant and more like a restricted librarian. We have built a system based on the assumption that we can classify the world once and be done with it, but in a collaborative environment, that model breaks. If the labels are missing, the AI sees too much, and if the labels are there, they are often too rigid, preventing the AI from connecting the dots between departments. We are currently seeing a massive gap between what the C-suite expects from AI and what the data architecture allows. And you cannot have a high-performing AI agent if your data is locked in 1990s-style folder hierarchies. The inheritance paradox means the AI is only as secure as your worst SharePoint admin's mistake from 2014. We have to admit that the current approach to classification is failing because it is static, manual, and treats data as an object to be locked away rather than an asset to be used. Most organizations are currently in pilot purgatory because they realized 6 weeks in that their permissions are a mess. They try to fix it by adding more labels, but adding more labels to a broken system just creates more silos and does not solve the underlying problem of visibility. The shift we need is not about better tags, it is about a better model. We have been focusing on the what, which is the file itself, but we need to start focusing on the who, the where, and the why. The problem is not just that labels are missing, it is that the ones we have are static and do not account for the reality of how work happens today. Work is dynamic, so our security must be dynamic too. If we do not fix this, the AI will continue to hallucinate because it is looking at the wrong data, or worse, it will tell the truth about data that should have been hidden. To fix the rework loop, we have to look at the underlying model of how we grant access, the high cost of rework. We talk about the productivity gains of AI as if they are a gross number, and we see the 9 hours saved per month and assume the job is done. But the reality is much messier because currently, about 40% of the time your employees save by using AI is immediately lost to fixing what the AI got wrong. This is the hidden friction of the silo. When Copilot doesn't have access to the good data, the finalized contract, the actual budget, or the verified project plan, it doesn't stop. It guesses. It looks at the dark data it can see, like an old draft from a shared folder or a speculative chat message, and it builds a response based on that. The result is a rework loop that is quietly draining your ROI. We can actually quantify this digital debt. For your top performers, the power users who are leaning into these tools the most, this rework accounts for about 1.5 weeks of lost time per year. Think about that. You are paying for a premium license to save time, but because your data is siloed, your best people are spending nearly 2 full work weeks just auditing machine-generated errors. They are essentially acting as high-paid proofreaders for a system that was supposed to be their co-pilot. This happens because rigid classification creates a vacuum. If the AI is barred from the system of record by an outdated sensitivity label, it will fill that vacuum with whatever system of convenience it can find. In departments like finance and HR, this leads to outputs that are confidently wrong. A finance manager might ask for a summary of quarterly spend. If the actual ERP export is locked down, but a messy, unclassified working draft is sitting in a public Teams channel, the AI will summarize the draft. The manager then spends 20 minutes finding the discrepancies. This is the friction between gross efficiency and net value. If it takes you 2 minutes to generate a report, but 20 minutes to verify the numbers because the AI couldn't see the source of truth, you haven't actually gained anything. You've just shifted the labor from creation to correction. This rework isn't just a nuisance, it's a symptom of a structural failure. We've spent years building data silos to protect information, but in the age of generative AI, those silos act as blindfolds. When the AI is blindfolded, it hallucinates. It tries to please the user by connecting dots that shouldn't be connected. We are seeing organizations where the rework rate is so high that employees are starting to lose trust in the tool. They stop asking the AI for complex analysis and revert to using it for basic email drafting. The moment that happens, your AI strategy has failed. You are paying for an engine, but only using the headlights. To fix this rework loop, we have to stop looking at the AI and start looking at the plumbing. The good data exists, the brilliant insights are there, but they are trapped behind a wall of legacy permissions and static labels that were designed for a world where humans did all the searching. We need to move toward a model where the AI can see what it needs to see, exactly when it needs to see it, without compromising security. We have to look at the underlying model of how we grant access, because as long as the AI is working with partial context, your employees will be working overtime to fix the results. That is a cost no organization can afford to ignore. From containment to context, we need to stop thinking about security as a wall. For decades, the industry relied on a hardened perimeter model. You were either inside the network or you were out, but that world is gone. Today, the perimeter is porous. People work from home, they use unmanaged devices, and they collaborate with external vendors. In this environment, the old model of containment, where you lock data in a folder and assume it's safe because the folder is private, is a dangerous illusion. It's dangerous because it assumes the threat is only outside. But the real threat in the age of Copilot is the internal permission creep that has been accumulating for years. We need to move from a strategy of containment to a strategy of context. The old model was built for structure. It assumed that a file's sensitivity was a fixed attribute. You tagged a document as confidential, and that was the end of the story. But in a collaborative AI environment, that tag is too blunt. It doesn't tell us enough. It doesn't account for who is asking, what device they are using, or where they are located. This is why we are seeing a massive shift toward dynamic access control, or DAC. This isn't just a technical upgrade, it's a philosophical shift. It moves the decision-making process from the moment the file is created to the millisecond the data is requested. It's the difference between a static lock and a smart sensor. By 2026, the industry is mandating a shift toward attribute-based access control, or ABAC. This is the foundation of the modern identity fabric. Instead of relying on a single static label, ABAC evaluates a dozen different risk signals in real time. It looks at the user's role, sure, but it also looks at the health of their laptop. It looks at their physical location. It even looks at their behavior. If a user who typically only accesses marketing files suddenly asks Copilot to summarize the entire payroll database from a coffee shop in a different country, the system shouldn't just look at the sensitivity label. It should look at the context and say, no. This is how we move from, is this file labeled, to, should this user see this data now? It's a subtle shift with massive implications. It allows us to be more permissive when the risk is low and more restrictive when the risk is high. It breaks the silos because it allows for just-in-time access. If the marketing team needs to see that highly confidential launch date, the system can grant them temporary, read-only access based on the context of their current project without permanently breaking the security of the file. This is the only way to enable the kind of cross-departmental intelligence that AI promises without turning your tenant into a data free-for-all. The ROI of these dynamic systems is already becoming clear. Organizations that move away from static labels toward a context-aware model are seeing 15 to 30% reductions in their cyber insurance premiums. Why? Because insurers know that static labels are easy to bypass or ignore. Dynamic systems, on the other hand, are much harder to exploit. They provide a level of continuous verification that static models simply can't match. They reduce the blast radius of a compromised account because the attacker can't just inherit years of sloppy permissions. Every request is a new evaluation. Every interaction is a new opportunity to verify trust. This isn't just a theoretical shift for IT architects. It is a survival requirement for the next wave of agentic AI. As we move toward agents that can take actions on our behalf, scheduling meetings, moving money, or updating records, we cannot rely on a set-it-and-forget-it security model. We need a system that understands the intent behind the action. We need security that is as smart as the AI it is protecting. This leads us to the technical roadmap, because while the philosophy is changing, the tools to implement it are finally arriving in the Purview ecosystem. The 2026 Purview roadmap, the shift toward context-aware intelligence, is finally showing up in the actual architecture of the Microsoft ecosystem. We are moving past the era where Purview was just a tool for compliance reporting, and by 2026 it has evolved into a real-time diagnostic engine. One of the most significant changes is the move to always-on diagnostics for endpoint DLP. In the past, troubleshooting a policy failure meant a week of back and forth between IT and the user while they tried to reproduce a glitch that happened once. Now those diagnostic traces are stored locally on the device in a secure, compressed format for 90 days. This allows the system to analyze exactly why a specific file was blocked or why a label failed to apply without ever sending the actual sensitive content to the cloud. It is local visibility paired with global enforcement. This diagnostic power is being amplified by AI-powered explanation tools. We have reached a level of complexity where human admins can no longer manually track the difference between a dozen different DLP policies. When a policy changes, the system now generates a natural language summary to explain exactly what was modified and which user groups are affected. It also shows what the potential impact on collaborative workflows will be, which reduces the risk of policy drift. This is when security rules become so tangled that they start blocking legitimate work. These tools allow the security team to act as enablers rather than gatekeepers by providing clarity on the rules of the road in a language the business can actually understand. A critical piece of this roadmap is the role of restricted SharePoint search, or RSS. This is the emergency brake for your AI deployment. It allows you to explicitly exclude high-risk sites like your board papers, your payroll data, or your legal strategy from being used as grounding for Copilot. Before you even touch a sensitivity label, you can use RSS to ensure that the AI simply cannot see the most dangerous corners of your tenant. It is a foundational layer of protection that recognizes that not all data is created equal. This gives you the breathing room to fix your permission debt without having to shut down the entire AI experiment. We are also seeing a massive expansion in auto-labeling capabilities. The goal for 2026 is to be secure by default. Your SharePoint libraries are no longer passive buckets because they are becoming active participants in your security posture. When a file is uploaded to a specific library, the default label of that library is applied at rest automatically. If that file contains sensitive information types, the system can now override lower priority manual labels. This closes the coverage gap that has plagued manual systems for years. It ensures that even if a user forgets to tag a document, the platform has their back. It is the move from a voluntary system to a mandatory automated infrastructure. To manage this at scale, we are increasingly relying on the Graph API for custom usage analytics. We can now look under the hood to see exactly which departments are siloed. If the R&D team has a 90% rework rate because they are blocked from seeing the engineering specs, the data will show it. We can identify the bottlenecks where rigid classification is killing productivity and adjust the policies in real time. This is how we move from a reactive security posture to a proactive governance strategy. We are using the data to tell us where the system is breaking rather than waiting for a user to complain or a breach to occur. But even with the best tools, the strategy fails without executive alignment. You can have the most advanced Purview setup in the world, but if your leadership still views data as something to be hoarded, you will never realize the full value of AI. This brings us to a new kind of risk that is emerging from the ground up. It is a challenge that is not coming from hackers or external threats, but from your own employees trying to be productive. We need to talk about the citizen-developer dilemma. The citizen-developer dilemma. We are currently witnessing the largest explosion of unregulated creation in the history of enterprise computing. There are now over 1 million low-code assets living inside the Microsoft ecosystem. We have empowered employees to build their own apps, their own flows, and now their own AI agents. But this empowerment has a dark side. We have moved from shadow IT to shadow AI, where non-technical users are building complex agents on top of ungoverned, messy data. This is the risk of agent sprawl. It is what happens when a marketing coordinator builds a custom GPT in Copilot Studio to help with vendor queries, but they inadvertently ground that agent on a SharePoint site containing every contract the company has signed since 2012. The dilemma is that we cannot simply turn it off. If you kill the ability for people to solve their own problems, you kill the very agility that AI is supposed to provide. Instead, we have to move toward a tiered governance model. Not all agents are created equal. A low-code tool that helps an individual summarize their own emails using standard Teams connectors is a low-risk asset. It should bypass the heavy-duty review process. But the moment an agent touches a system of record like Dataverse or a sensitive SQL database, it needs a gatekeeper. We have to stop treating citizen development as a single category and start treating it as a spectrum of risk. The industry is pivoting from the old concept of citizen development toward what we now call AI-augmented personal building. The difference is subtle but crucial. In the old world, the user was a developer, but in the new world, the user is an orchestrator. They are directing the AI to build the solution for them. This makes the guardrails in Copilot Studio more important than the code itself. We need to implement content moderation layers that prevent these agents from hallucinating or leaking data through prompt injection attacks that the user did not even know were possible. You would not let a summer intern write your firewall rules, so we should not let them build agents that have read access to the entire corporate wiki. The fix is structural. We need to automate the enforcement of data loss prevention policies within the low-code environment. If a user tries to connect an AI agent to an external unmanaged Dropbox account, the system should block it instantly. If they try to build a bot that queries a library marked with a highly confidential sensitivity label, the deployment should trigger an automatic manual review by the IT ops team. This creates a secure by design pathway for innovation. It allows the builders to build while ensuring that the most sensitive assets of the organization remain behind the context-aware walls we have been discussing. We are moving into an era where every employee is a potential architect of the company's intelligence. That is a massive competitive advantage if managed correctly, but it is a catastrophic liability if left to chance. The goal is not to stop the sprawl, but to govern the flow. We need to provide the citizen builders with pre-approved templates and safe zones where they can experiment without risking the crown jewels. This ensures that the agents they create are an extension of our governance strategy rather than an exception to it. This leads us to the final hurdle, which is getting the C-suite to treat access as a strategic asset. You cannot govern a million agents from the basement. You need executive alignment. It is time to move the conversation from the server room to the boardroom. The executive buy-in strategy. The technical battle for context-aware security is being won in the code, but the strategic battle is still being lost in the boardroom. For years, identity and access management was treated like a plumbing issue. It was something for the basement teams to handle while the business focused on growth. In 2026, that mindset is a liability. We have to reframe the entire conversation because identity is no longer just a login. It is the core control plane for digital trust. If your leadership doesn't understand that, your AI deployment will remain a series of expensive, disconnected experiments. We need to stop pitching security as a cost center. Instead, we have to frame it as a decision velocity enabler. Most executives view security as a series of no moments. No, you can't use that tool. No, you can't share that file. But a modern identity fabric does the opposite. It provides the yes that allows the business to move faster. When you have continuous context-aware verification, you can onboard a new partner in hours instead of weeks. You can give a consultant access to exactly what they need for a 3-day project, and then you can watch that access vanish automatically the moment they finished. This isn't about restriction, it's about agility. It's about creating an environment where the right people can act on the right information without the friction of manual approvals. We can see the cost of ignoring this in the M&A market. There is a massive maturity gap emerging between organizations that have mastered identity governance and those that are still relying on static legacy models. When a high-maturity firm acquires a competitor, they can integrate the new workforce into their AI ecosystem in days. But for firms with poor identity hygiene, that integration drags on for months, and this delay bleeds value while stalling the very synergies the merger was supposed to create. Poor identity governance is a direct hit to post-merger value. It is a drag on the balance sheet that most CEOs haven't even quantified yet. This is why the pitch for a 5 to 20% budget increase for Identity Fabric isn't a request for more security spend. It's an investment in growth infrastructure. It's the digital equivalent of building a high-speed rail network between your data silos. You are moving from a hardened perimeter that everyone tries to bypass to a continuous verification model that actually supports the way people work. You are telling the C-suite that if they want the 5 times productivity boost that AI promises, they have to pay for the foundation that makes it safe. You have to move the goalposts from protecting the data to managing the flow of intelligence. The shift to a context-aware model is the only way to build a resilient enterprise in an age of agentic AI. It allows the organization to scale its intelligence without scaling its risk. When the C-suite treats access as a strategic asset, the entire culture of the company shifts. Security becomes a shared responsibility, and data becomes a liquid resource rather than a hoarded secret. It's time to stop looking at the cost of the tools and start looking at the cost of the friction. Because in the AI era, the fastest company wins, and you can't be fast if your data is trapped in a lie. Your 2026 mandate is clear. You must audit your permission debt before you scale your AI licenses. The technology is ready, but your architecture likely isn't. The challenge for the next quarter is to implement mandatory auto-labeling and execute a 90-day site cleanup to close the most obvious gaps. Stop the hoarding, start the flow. If you want to share your silo-breaking progress or discuss how your team is handling the shift to context-aware permissions, connect with Mirko Peters on LinkedIn. Let's build an intelligence model that actually works. Subscribe for more deep dives into the future of work. Stay secure, stay productive.